Life Audio.
During COVID, I noticed I was drinking wine every night for a while, and I noticed I even wanted to do it alone. And it was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right before you hit that sort of second shift of the day. I'm like, oh gosh, what am I supposed to do with myself at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? And so I would just go and reach for that bottle of wine, pour a glass of wine and turn it into 2. And what helped me was to think about where is this going? And do I want to go down this path where this is what I do every day? And do I like the fact that I don't necessarily want everybody to know about this?
Hello, and welcome to the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I am your host, John Seidel. This is your home for real stories, radical vulnerability, and remarkable comebacks. In the end, this podcast is a place for the desperate, the downtrodden, the destitute, and especially the drunk. But it's also a place of hope and healing. I know that firsthand because I'm the Christian who became an alcoholic, not the other way around. Today, I've found sobriety after decades of struggling. But more importantly than finding sobriety, I found Jesus. My prayer is that as I interview people just like you and just like me, along with professionals in the fields of trauma, faith, and addiction recovery, you will find the peace that is available to you through Christ on the other side of whatever you're going through and whatever addiction that might be. Because let's face it, we're all addicted to something. So welcome. Let's get radically vulnerable as we explore what it looks like to be on this journey of messy sanctification. We'll be right back after this. They say not to meet your heroes, right? Because sorely you will be disappointed. But I can say that I have met one of my heroes, and this person is the real deal. They are genuine. They are just who you would think they are. Now, that doesn't mean this person is perfect. But what I can tell you is that today's guest is someone that I owe a debt of gratitude to, and I am honored and excited to bring her and introduce her to you today. Her name is Kimberly Miller, Kim. And she wrote the book, Boundaries for Your Soul. I'm holding it up if you're watching this online at theveritasdaily.com, which you can do. She wrote the book, Boundaries for Your Soul, with Allison Cook. Now, Allison Cook was one of our early guests on the podcast, and so we interviewed her. But now we get the chance to talk to Kimberly, and I am just so excited about this conversation. And while I guess you could say the topic is in one sense similar to what we talked with Allison, it goes in a completely different direction, or I should say we talk about things that we didn't get to talk about with Allison. And so even if you've listened to the Allison episode, please listen to the Kim episode that you're about to hear. She has written this book, Boundaries for Your Soul. She's a licensed therapist. I ran into her at a conference last fall that we were both speaking at, and went up to her, and you just don't know, right? Like, you just don't know how people are going to react. And she was engaging. She looked into my soul and we just had the most wonderful conversation. And I invited her on the podcast, and we are now talking today. She lives in Southern California. She is the niece of June Hunt. You might know June Hunt. She runs an organization called Hope for the Heart. June has a radio program that has been on for decades and is one of the sweetest people you will ever meet. And Kimberly, the apple does not fall too far from the tree. So we are going to talk about internal family systems, and we're also going to talk about, I'm going to pose a question to her at the end that I think is a question I didn't prepare to ask, and one I've never asked before, but has been kind of ruminating in the back recesses of my mind, and that is this. If we, people who struggle with addiction, have truly healed, why can't we go back to drinking? Have you ever thought about that? I've thought about that. If I have truly healed and done the work, why can't I go back to drinking? And if I can't go back to drinking, does that mean A, I haven't truly done the work, or B, something else is at play? And so we're going to talk about that question. Kim was so gracious. She mentions my book, Finding Rest. So I know I talk a lot about Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, the book that this podcast is named after. But if you want to get to Finding Rest as well, that she references in this podcast, you can purchase Finding Rest as well on Amazon, or you can go to findrestnow.com, findrestnow.com. This is such an important conversation about getting to the root, about how we need to invite Jesus into all those parts of ourselves. I say that a lot. That comes from Kim. That comes from her work. This is foundational to the work that I do today. So please engage with this episode and enjoy the conversation with Kim Miller. Kim, thank you so much for joining the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. There are people you meet, and there are people that you get a chance to talk to that have changed your life, and the Lord has used you in that way. And this is just an absolute treat. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, so much for having me. I truly admire your work and your books and your podcast. And it was just a pleasure to meet you at a conference recently. And I'm just so glad we have this chance to talk.
Yes. Well, thank you. For those now, I did a little bit of an introduction, obviously talked about the book, but just kind of give an overview of the work that you do in the space that you do it.
Sure. Well, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I and my co-author, Allison Cook, wrote a book that is introducing a method called internal family systems therapy to the church. It's IFS from a Christ-centered perspective. So IFS falls into the subcategory of psychological methods called parts work, which is a way of looking at the human person as having different parts and focusing in on one part at a time, or then potentially like a cluster around that initial focus part. And then from a Christ-centered perspective, we invite the Lord to minister to that part, or to be present with that part. So it's a form of inner healing prayer, really. People may have heard of like sozo ministries, or these methods of focusing on a particular area of the soul. Oftentimes it's around a particular memory, and then inviting Jesus to be there and minister to the person, so that the power of God and the blessing of God reaches the place in the soul where the person needs him the most. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start there, right? So I want to unpack a little bit, because I'll be honest, when my Christian therapist first introduced something called parts work, I'm like, are you wanting me to be like schizophrenic? Like, are you multiple personalities here?
Yeah.
So explain to the audience, what does parts work mean? And for those who are a little skeptical, or it sounds like, you're talking to yourself, like what is parts work?
Right. Okay. Well, if you think about it, everyone has self-talk. We all can have this internal conversation going on in our heads. We all have thoughts about ourselves. The psalmist says, like, praise the Lord, O my soul. Why are you downcast, O my soul? Right? So, and nobody said, oh, David is schizophrenic. Like,
right.
So schizophrenia is like a diagnosis when, from an IFS perspective, we would say like parts are stuck in extreme roles because of trauma. And so much so that they don't even know each other. But at a less extreme level, one would say that we all experience trauma with little t, or just woundedness throughout life. And when that happens, parts of us get stuck in time at those ages. And so we all walk around with parts that are younger that are carrying memories from the past when we were hurt. And so that's a very normal human experience. It is the human experience to have different parts of us that have different thoughts and feelings. Whether we're talking about wounded parts, or we could also be talking about just parts with different roles and parts with different preferences. You like one night you may have a part that wants to like stay home and watch a football game, and you may have a part that would really like to be, playing with your child at that same night. And so you could say, oh, I have two different parts that have different feelings, or may have a part that feels really responsible and a part that wants to check out. So it's just a language that a particular psychologist developed because he noticed his clients would talk like this and say, well, there's a part of me that wants to, he was actually working with eating disorder clients and saying, oh, the part of me wants to really like binge and purge, and a part of me wants to restrict. And so that's where he got the language. And it became a really popular method because everybody realizes, oh, we all have these parts.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that history because I think maybe perhaps that's why it's been so beneficial, is to know that that language was in a sense birthed out of addiction talk.
Yes. And I was talking about IFS just now. I mean, parts work goes really far back. The first person let's start with Freud. I mean, Freud, the founder of psychology, said, well, we have an ego, id, superego. So he was already mapping the soul. And then Carl Jung, who came soon after him, said he was the first person to say we have an inner child. And then there are developments after that, like transactional analysis said we have the inner parent, inner child. And there's voice dialogue, there's Gestalt, which is like seeing someone, part of you sitting in a chair across from you and seeing what you would say to that part of you. And internal family systems is kind of the latest iteration of parts work. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have, and if you're watching this episode, which I encourage you to do, you can do it at theveritasdaily.com. In the back of Boundaries for Your Soul, you have just a very helpful graphic. I love graphics, right? And so you have this, and I'm holding this up for everyone to see, but you have this map of the soul. And you talk about managers, firefighters, and exiles kind of coming around this spirit-led self. Can you explain what you mean by those three things, managers, firefighters, and exiles, as well as the spirit-led self?
Sure. Okay. So we've established that we all have parts of our souls. If you really think about it, we have parts that play different roles in three different categories. And this is just one way to think about the human soul, and it's not gospel truth, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's right. It's just, it's helpful for a lot of people. And I encourage your listeners to try it on for size. The idea is that we have protector parts and more vulnerable parts. The protector parts are divided into two categories, which are managers, the parts that are really good at getting things done, and the firefighter parts, which want to just escape. And then
that was me. I had a lot of firefighters going on.
And we all have all of them, and we just have them in different degrees at different times. And then we all have what we call exile parts, which tend to be the younger parts, the parts that are more wounded and are not front and center. They're more hidden. And those are the parts that we need to be spending extra time giving attention to because they're lonely and they're hurting, and they're going to cause our protector parts to become more extreme. The goal is for all the parts to be sort of living harmoniously and all getting attention equally and be working together as a team, like a functional family. So the reason why it's called internal family systems therapy is because we're applying family systems therapy to the inner life. And in a healthy family system, everyone is important, everyone plays a role and is working together, right, and respects one another. And the same is true for our inner world. None of these parts are bad. What they can veer off course from the path that God would have for them. And so they can do harmful things, which we would call sin. But they are all parts of you, and God created you. And so they're good, just like a child. A child is a helpful analogy. They're younger. Yeah. They're younger, and you don't want to get rid of a child if they misbehave. You want to connect and redirect, which was a Dan Siegel phrase.
Yes.
Yeah.
So can you explain the difference between a manager and a firefighter?
Sure. Yes. So the managers make plans. They ruminate. They present you well to the world. Um, so right now we're most likely driven by manager parts of ourselves, hopefully that are healthy manager parts that are thinking about, how can we help our listeners? Um, what's a constructive thing to say right now? So we're in this mode, this manager mode right now. And the church is largely manager driven. It's driven, if you go to church, you see a lot of people that are kind of leading with their manager parts most likely in the moment. So manager parts make lists, make grocery lists, make to-do lists,
Yeah.
There are personal representatives. And the firefighter parts are parts that step in when there's pain to try to extinguish the flames of painful emotions through feel-good behaviors. And oftentimes these parts can be polarized with each other. So the firefighters are like extreme working out parts, are extreme cleaning parts, are addictive parts. So the parts that drink a lot, that overeat, that might do drugs. These are all any mood altering behavior is a firefighter part, because the goal of a firefighter is to change the state of the person and to move the person from a place of pain to a place of relief, to get relief. And the behaviors are not always unhelpful or unhealthy, but it's when they become extreme that they are unhealthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then explain how, it's become such a buzzword now these days. And I think that's unfortunate because we miss the importance of it. But there's that word triggered, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think because it's overused or because it's not used properly, now we throw the baby out with the bathwater. But yet, I think through your work and reading Boundaries for Your Soul, what I've come to understand is, no, that's a real thing, right? And so explain how triggers, in a sense, trigger firefighters. Like we encounter something, we are triggered, and then a firefighter steps in. Can you explain that process? We'll be right back after this.
I like the word activate because you're right. The word trigger has some baggage around it.
Yeah.
And it's also, it suggests to me that things are more black and white than they really are, because oftentimes it's more like there's relationship internally. And the question is what part is really speaking at the moment more loudly than other parts, but I think just to answer your question, when something happens in life that is painful, like, for example, if you're needed in a certain way and you don't get to do what you would prefer to be doing in the moment, you might have a part that shows up that tries to help you check out of that feeling. And so you have a desire to escape in some feel-good behavior. I mean, even it could be literally wanting to run away or wanting to reach for a favorite substance. And it's just a very, very common experience. And I could go on about like what I think is helpful in those moments.
Please do.
I mean, what I was going to just say, where my mind was going, was a goal would be to find those healthy ways to cope, healthy coping mechanisms. And, but however, that can be a manager part that's doing that. And so, making a good plan. And so you're always wanting to work with all the parts at the same time in a given moment, and be checking in with manager parts that are making plans, and to help preserve you, checking in with the firefighter parts that are wanting to make you feel better, and checking in with those exile parts that are surfacing, that are causing those protectors to come online. And then I haven't even mentioned the self. So IFS has this concept of the self that's sort of the sacred center, and the self is an active agent, but brings a sense of calm, curiosity, compassion, clarity, connection.
I love those two words, compassion and curiosity. I think those
Compassion
are
and curiosity.
really huge.
Yeah. And I encourage folks to start with curiosity, because compassion can be a reach sometimes when they're blended with a part, but to start getting curious. Curiosity, I would say, is probably my favorite word. It's really good in terms of how to become more like Jesus. Starting with curiosity about your own parts. That is a great place to start, and taking a U-turn, no matter what the circumstances is. Like psychologists have said that 90% of our reactivity is actually about something that's going on inside of us as opposed to externally. So just first, no matter what a situation calls for, what action it calls for, just start with a curiosity, like, oh, what's going on with me that I'm having these emotions about this situation right now? Yeah.
That has been, I think, one of there's plenty. One of the most important things that I've taken and put into practice is having a curiosity. Why am I feeling this way? My wife and I, just this past weekend, we were out to dinner, and she's like, hey, for your 40th birthday, do you want like a big party and whatnot, right? And because I have always been considered myself an extrovert. And yet I was like, I really don't. And I said, maybe we do something as a family. If you want my friends to record something and we play it on the TV, fine. And she was like, she goes, I'm really surprised. And I immediately found myself getting slightly defensive, because I'm like, well, do you not know me? But I got curious about that. And over the course of 24 hours, I'm like, yeah, you know what? She's right. I used to be very extroverted. And now even, since getting sober, I still find myself, I used to think, well, I became less extroverted because I was drinking and I just wanted to, go internal and find an excuse to drink and not go out. And that can be true. But I've also found now, since getting healthy, that I don't want to go out as much and be around people. And so I got curious about that, and I started praying through that. And the Lord revealed, because before alcohol was my drug, people were, because I didn't know how to sit with myself. So I didn't know how to be alone and sit with myself in my own thoughts. So before I turned to alcohol, for years, I just needed to be around people because I couldn't stand the silence.
What a great awareness about yourself. Yeah.
But that was because I got here. I took that initial defensiveness. Well, why? You're my wife. You should know me. What are you judging me? What?
Wow.
And I said, okay, Lord, why? She's actually right. But why? Let's go deeper. And my gosh, it just opened. I'm still reeling from this realization. I'm like,
wow. What a incredible concept to ponder, and what a treasure you got out of that experience, which is realizing how much you've grown, and the self-respect of knowing, wow, I used to not be able to sit with my own thoughts, and now I can. That's growth, and that's what the Lord asks us to do, is to grow more mature, and you're doing it, and way to go, and you wouldn't have realized that amazing growth in yourself unless you had gotten curious.
Right.
And it's amazing how other people respond so positively when we get curious. I'm guessing that your relationship with your wife is better because that was your reaction, as opposed to if you had expressed irritability, and then she learned from it, and now she's going to want to get curious about herself. It's contagious, right?
Yeah, it really is.
And it's so much more attractive, and it's so much better for bonding and just connecting with people. And, there's a great phrase in the IFS community: the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but it's connection.
Yeah, Johann Hari.
Oh, okay.
I think did a TED Talk about this.
It's really great. Okay. Thanks. I didn't know that reference. So curiosity makes us so much more easy to relate to. It makes us easier for other people to relate to. Whereas there's nothing that can kill a relationship more than criticism, shame, blame, and criticism. And it's also, biblical, like Matthew 7, Jesus says, why are you focusing on the speck in your neighbor's eye? Take a look at the plank in your own eye. but before you talk to your neighbor. So he's not saying don't confront people, but he's really encouraging us and inviting us to look at our hearts. And Psalm 139, search me, O God, know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting.
Yeah.
Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. So it's a good thing to examine our own souls and understand, like, why am I getting reactive in this moment? And it's going to be really hard to do, right? Because it's our natural tendency is to blame. Yeah.
So what do we do? Okay, let's talk about the exiles. We've talked about the managers. Those are kind of those. Maybe I'm saying this wrong. Correct me, but the parts that we generally can look at as healthy, right? They're doing good things. The firefighters come in when things are out of whack, when we feel stuff we don't want to feel, when we want to escape. Right. Those exiles. What is an exile, and why do we use that term?
It's a part of ourselves that doesn't get very much attention. The parts that are lonely, carrying shame, rejection, feelings of worthlessness, and painful memories from the past. And we exile them because they're difficult to think about, and other people may not be able to handle them very well, and so they might not help our relationships. So they have to be managed. They have to be. I tend to be blended with manager parts more than any other type of part. So I noticed that I said they have to be managed. They need to be welcomed. All parts are welcome and invited into a safe space where they can be heard and seen and understood and really validated and empathized with. And then also to get to know Jesus. Because this is a very interesting thing, John, is that parts don't all know Jesus, like even in the soul of a Christian.
That is a huge thing you just said there. I want to make sure people understand that, because when in my chapter in Confessions, where I say, how does this happen? It's because I hadn't welcomed Jesus into all the parts of myself. And some people are like, what?
Yeah.
So thank you. Please go on.
Yeah. Okay. This is a phenomenological observation. This is something that I have observed, that psychologists have observed, and I encourage you to experience it yourself through getting to know your own parts that don't know the Lord, and working with groups of people. It's always true that people have parts. Christians have parts that don't know the Lord, and when you ask them, because you can talk to parts, you can really get to know a part of yourself. And if it's behaving in a way that you wish you wouldn't, maybe it's because it hasn't met Jesus yet.
Yes.
And so inviting him to draw near with the part's permission, and if it's afraid to meet Jesus, to just have it express those fears, and ask if it's just willing to experiment for a little bit, getting to know him, and then inviting him to speak and to do his thing, which is always transformative, and to bring healing. Exodus, 15:26, I am the Lord who heals you.
Yeah.
And that's who he is. He established his name as the Lord who heals, Jehovah Rapha, and he will bring healing where he's welcome and invited, just through his love, through the power of connection with him.
I think of James 5:16 as well, right? Where it says, confess your sins one to another, not so that you can have peace, not so that you can have whatever. It says so that you may be healed, right? And so I think when we talk about those exiled parts of ourselves, we confess, hey, it's feeling this, I'm feeling this way, it's feeling this way, I'm doing this. That's where healing comes in.
Oh, wow. That's so powerful, John. And you've been just a role model for so many, and a leader in being transparent and honest. And I want to say I have so much respect for you, because the people group in the Gospels that Jesus had the harshest words for were the Pharisees. Yeah. And it's just so easy to know the Christian language and speak the Christian vernacular, and especially if you're raised in the church, and never be honest about our woundedness.
Yeah.
You know.
So maybe going back a little bit to those parts of ourselves that don't know Jesus, theologically, how do we make sense of that? Like, I don't know if you have, is it more of an observation that you've seen? I just know that some people have pushed back on that with me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily have all the, I mean, I went to seminary, but yet I don't have all the perfect response. I'm just curious what your response is. Like, well, I don't think that's theologically true. And I'm like, well, I know it's true for me, and I know it's true for pretty much every alcoholic I talk to and addict I talk to, is that there are parts of themselves. I know it's true for someone like a Philip Yancey who can love Jesus and talk about grace, and yet there are parts of himself that he hasn't introduced to Jesus, right? So how do we make sense of that theologically?
Well, I like to think of that verse that says we're working out our salvation in fear and trembling. And also, that the kingdom of God is within us, and God says to expand the kingdom of God. So we're expanding the kingdom of God within us as we introduce Jesus to parts of ourselves through internal evangelization. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that there's a scripture verse. There's not a scripture verse that says, we have parts of us that don't know Jesus, right? But again, when I say this is phenomenological, what I'm saying is like, it's a way of thinking that can be helpful, so that you can get clarity about what's going on inside you and help yourself become more like Christ. Because we're all about sanctification and becoming more mature, right? And that's what God wants from us.
Yeah.
And so what works? Let's just do whatever works. Whatever helps us become more like Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to die on the hill of saying we have parts that don't know Jesus. If there's a theological debate, I'm not going to say, and that's the hallmark or the cornerstone of my theology. No, I'm not even sure it's a theological statement.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying it's how people are. And I've experienced it. I've witnessed it over and over again, that when I'm working, so in the process of working with a part, you really listen to the part and get to know it. And there's a lot of times, I would say it's the norm, that when you're working with a part that's presenting itself for healing because it needs help, it usually hasn't met Christ yet. Sometimes it has, but just wants more of him, or needs to be healed more, spend more time in his presence, but oftentimes just doesn't know him. So,
yep. And I think you nailed it with the idea of sanctification, right? If all the parts of ourselves were introduced to Jesus perfectly, like, let's just even say that, right? So let's just even give the fact that, like, you become a Christian and suddenly all the parts of yourselves know Jesus at least a little bit, right? Well, you wouldn't need sanctification. Like, that wouldn't be a thing if they all knew him perfectly. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Because sanctification is that ongoing process of becoming more like Jesus. So there has to be parts of yourself that don't know him perfectly. Otherwise, you wouldn't need sanctification.
Right, exactly. I mean, when you humble your heart before the Lord and decide to follow him, when you believe in him and give your life to him, you become sanctified in his eyes. If you're in Christ, you are beloved. He sees you as he sees Jesus. And that's the theological truth, the biblical truth. And at the same time, there's areas of your life where you still need to work out holiness and become more and more sanctified, and that's where the parts work comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You, I want to go back to a phrase you used, because I think you have, I think it's at least a whole chapter on this. But you and Allison in the book talk about how you guys do it. But it's making a U-turn. You use that phrase, and I think
taking a U-turn. Yeah,
taking a U-turn. Explain what it means. Or I guess that's part 2, the 5 steps of taking a U-turn. Explain what it means to take a U-turn and how we do that.
All right. So there's 5 steps to a U-turn, but it starts with just noticing what you're feeling physically in a moment, because God made us psychosomatic beings. I subscribe to a biopsychosocial spiritual model of the human person. So it's all interrelated.
Yes.
Like if you're about to be attacked by a tiger, you start to have a rapid heartbeat, right? So if somebody is rude to you, cuts you off on the highway, you might feel tightness or tension in your shoulders, for example. So it's starting with what you're experiencing physically is always helpful. And that is a way of starting to take a U-turn. And then considering the idea that the feeling that you're having belongs to just one part of you. And then focusing on that part. So the first step is to focus. And then, excuse me, then the next step is to befriend that part, which is to ask yourself, how am I feeling toward it? And if you're feeling critical, then ask that inner critic to step aside and return to the target part and become curious about it. So that's focus and befriend. And then the third step is to invite Jesus. Focus, befriend, invite. Invite Jesus to be with it. And then to unburden it. So parts are carrying painful thoughts and feelings and memories. Invite a part to give those burdens to the Lord, to release them. Somehow cast your cares on him because he cares for you. And this is in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7 and 8. And then the last step is integrate, which is to kind of bring back in that inner critic and say, well, how are you feeling now toward that original part? Because we want, just like a family, we want all the family members to get along in the internal family. So focus, befriend, invite, unburden, integrate. And you can do this with a therapist, or you could do it on yourself. You could work through the steps on a piece of paper, like in a journal. Yeah.
And is the concept, because it's a U-turn, is you're like, hey, for most of your life, you've started to feel that. You've encountered an activation, an activating event. And 99 times out of 100, you've always kind of gone down this road and it's led to this. And so it's like, you know what? Maybe let's stop, let's pause and see if we can turn back, right? I mean, that's the idea,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. Take a U-turn. So we tend to focus on other people and be critical of other people. That's our natural state of mind. And that taking a U-turn is that intentional examining of the plank in your own eye, which Jesus called us to do. So it's saying, wait, I'm going to stop for a second and just become curious about what's activating me and why am I feeling activated about this? And might it have something to do with my past? And to focus on one part that is activated and get to know it better, just like a child, just like I would get to know a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had this happen like last year where I'm picking my kids up from school and there's someone who is parked in front of a fire hydrant.
Okay.
And you're like, okay, parked. And I literally felt myself get activated.
Yeah.
I'm like, what are you like? Come on. Right. And so I started getting, I felt it in my body, like all this stuff. And I paused and I was like, okay, again, get curious. Why? Right? Why is this working me up and activating me so much? I mean, I literally was like starting to shake, not out of anger, but just like I was getting very anxious. And I did some of the work that you're talking about, and I just came to the understanding of like, I would always say I'm a very justice-oriented person, right? And I think this is an important point too, where we can go one level deeper and be like, well, John's a justice-oriented person, right? Okay, but why? Right? It's like that 5-year-old that's always asking why. Like just keep asking why, right?
Yeah.
And basically through all of the work that I did in the subsequent day, it's like, because there were things that were done to me when I was a kid that were unjust, right? Yeah. And so then when I see something that like someone getting away with something, it activates me, you know?
Wow.
And so I started doing some of the, it's like, and that brings me to this question.
Okay.
Which is, when it comes to exiles, when it comes to those things, are they generally things that have happened to us in our childhood, in our younger years? or can it be stuff that happens later, or it's mostly stuff that happens to your child? How does that factor in?
I would say the younger we are when things happen to us, and the more serious they are, the stronger the feelings are, and the more often those feelings show up. And they also shape our personalities. Yeah.
Okay. And I think you talk about in the book maybe like we have that meaning making part of our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so explain that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a manager part that's trying to understand and make sense of what happened when we were young.
What this means. Hey,
yes.
This happened. What does this mean? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And getting to the root of it can be very helpful, because it's not to blame. And again, the point is not to blame, but it's just to understand yourself and what needs were not met, so that you can work toward getting those met in Christ and in Christian community now. Because if you don't know what the problem is, you might not know what the solution is.
That's a great line. That's a great line. For someone who's listening to this who wants to do IFS, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like, at least the way my therapist did, EMDR was very tied into IFS. What's the difference between doing IFS from a strictly secular perspective and doing IFS parts work from a Christian perspective?
Mm-hmm. Without the Christian integration component, the parts are really connecting to the self. So the focus in the therapy is on the self to part connection. So being present with a part from yourself, gets yourself getting curious about your part, and resourcing the part with the qualities of yourself, which are that curiosity, compassion, connection, etc. With the Christian integration component, we're focusing on inviting the Lord Jesus to be present with the part. And so while we do focus on that self-to-part connection, we also then take another step, which is really to develop that part to Christ connection. And the self is there's less pressure on the self, because the Lord's doing more of the healing. Now, in traditional, IFS, it's not integrated with Christianity. There is a resourcing component, and there's even the concept of inviting in like positive qualities, and even like the memory of people in your life, like your grandmother that may have been loving, or somebody in your life that may have been a positive person. And so that's the inviting step in IFS. What Allison and I were encouraging in our book was to focus on inviting Christ specifically, and using the name of the Lord. And although I will say, for some clients and for some people, there is baggage around the name of Jesus. And so while there's power in the name, there can also be emotions about a name. And for a person who's maybe just exploring Christianity, or has woundedness from the church, it could be that even using Christ versus Jesus, or using the term sacred presence, or there might be parts around saying the Lord. That term may sound sort of a certain type of evangelical, even though it's very biblical. So the whole point is to stay biblical and theologically sound, while also exploring what feels helpful to the parts of the system.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Going to the title of the book, Boundaries for Your Soul.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think at first glance, you're like, okay, what does that mean to set up boundaries? I mean, John Townsend obviously has done a lot of the work, and John Townsend blessed the title of this book, as you and I talked about at the conference. What does it mean to set boundaries within your soul?
Yes. Well, it's about having all the parts be welcome and honored as a family system, just like in a family, and not having a particular part like take over the system, and not having any part that is too exiled. So no part that's too close, no part that's too far from the self. So just like in a family, there can be a person that sort of dominates, or even in a group. We don't want any one part to dominate the whole system. So we want to set healthy boundaries and say, well, like if there's a part that's dominating, like for me, it's usually my manager part that's dominating. I might want to ask, or if there's a firefighter part that's dominating, it's kind of ruling, like driving the bus. Like really, my whole life is revolving around when I can have my next drink. Like if that's the MO of the system, then we're wanting to set a healthy boundary with that part and say, let's work with that part to say, okay, what if we had a drink in moderation once a week or something like that, or however often is actually helpful and healthy. But also make room for the manager that wants to get some things done today. Make some room for the exiles. So it's about setting healthy boundaries internally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of us who, struggle with addiction, it can come down to not wanting to be uncomfortable, right? I think that was for me, right? I wanted to escape. I say my ultimate addiction was to escapism, right? And so how do we learn to sit with those uncomfortable parts of ourselves?
Ooh, it's a good question. I don't know that I've ever really been asked that specific question.
We'll be right back after this.
Well, to get curious.
Okay.
Yeah. To get curious about what the discomfort is about, and really exploring that feeling. I would ask, what part is uncomfortable, and can it share more? Can it share more about why it's uncomfortable? And what is it afraid would happen? What are its fears? What are its hopes? And then how can I resource this part? Like how can I help the part to get its needs met, to help it fulfill its dreams?
Yeah.
Maybe set healthy limits. So really getting to know it, honoring and getting to know it better.
And you use that term a lot, but honoring, right? Honoring that part, right? Not trying to beat that part down, because I think what you make clear is the firefighter parts are really, they're trying to help, right?
Right.
They're doing it the only way they know how.
But the help may not be helpful.
Right.
Right.
And so it's not beating that part down, but it's saying, hey, in a sense, it's kind of showing them a different way, or saying, hey, and you talk about this in the book, like, we just need you to sit down.
Right. Right. Know? Well, there's so much shame, and shame is not helpful, and it doesn't help us become more like Christ. So I was really blown away one time when I heard Dick Schwartz speak. He's the founder of the IFS, and he was talking about suicide, and he was talking about how IFS approaches suicide differently. And he said, "What if we actually respected parts that are suicidal because they're trying to get the person to survive? They're actually trying. They're trying. Their intention is to help the person survive. Now, that's not to encourage the behavior that it wants to do, but immediately the shame just dissipates. And a person who is actually feeling in so much pain that they want to escape life, to be told, wow, I admire that you want to live. That this part of you that's wanting to escape wants to live. And I admire that you're trying to come up with something. That reduces the shame. And then you can work. Then you're building a relationship. And then you can begin to talk about, all right, well, let's connect more. And it's the connection that heals, that brings healing to that desire to escape. And then there's no longer the desire to die, And that's, it's such a radical concept. But the same goes for addiction. Like, what if we honored the part for its intention to help?
Yeah.
The part that's discomfort, this part that's uncomfortable and feeling discomfort, and then get to know it better. And then automatically that sense of shame is reduced, right? And then asking like, okay, what are some more help? Like, do I really want to drink that much because I'm going to feel terrible in the morning? What if I tried a really, like a really good dinner or something, let's try something else, like another creative. My Aunt June, who you mentioned, my Aunt June Hunt, she taught me this phrase, creative alternatives. And I just love it because it's like so often I might think of something and it's maybe not really that good for me. But I say, I want it for this reason. Well, what's a creative alternative,
Yeah.
And can I come up with something? Like, I'm really wanting a glass of wine with a steak because it's hard to have steak without a glass of wine. What if I have like some really, really good, like grape juice or like I have this like really good goji berry juice that I get from Young Living.
Yeah.
And, they make the essential oils and that does it for me, John. Like I used to say I have to have a glass of wine with steak, but then it interrupts my sleep and the wine interrupts my sleep. And I'm like, I really wish I could have that great flavor of a drink without the sleep interruption. Well, I've found something that works. It's a creative alternative, And so then, so as opposed to saying like, oh, I'm so mad at myself for wanting to have a glass of wine again, So
have you encountered critics of this parts of ourselves conversation that say, well, you're being too permissive. Like, no, you need to be harsher on these people. And like, how do we respond to that?
Sure. I mean, there's a whole debate within the like addiction and psychology fields about how to respond to addiction or addictive behaviors or processes. And people have, debates and arguments about what is the most effective strategy. The typical method in the therapy community is to make with someone who is addictive or suicidal is to, I just brought in suicide, but if we're really focusing on addiction, is to create a contract, or to agree to go cold turkey. Mm-hmm. And then there's like the 12-step program is all about sobriety and like how many days can you go without drinking. But what the IFS community would say is, well, then that's just encouraging those manager parts to step into the lead, which is going to then activate the firefighter parts even more because there's going to be a increased polarization within the internal system. And what we need is to check in with all the parts, get all the parts on board to create internal harmony and connection, which is healing, and there'll be less of a need for the addictive behavior in the first place. So,
I love that.
And I mean, it may be that there's a role for a contract and there's a role for the 12-step group. And
sure, absolutely.
It's one piece, it's one part, but let's continue to work ourselves around the triad to check in with all the parts, just like we check in with all members of a family. What if nobody ever spoke to the kids at family dinner table, right? Or nobody ever asked the mom, like, how was your day? Or if like the dad was just ignored because there was a strong parent and daughter, mother-child connection like that. If any part is being ignored, that's not going to be healthy for the whole family. So you want to constantly check, okay, so I made this contract to behave well. I agreed to go to my 12-step meeting every day this week or whatever. Agreed to check in with my sponsor. Sure, those are good things, but let's check in. How does the firefighter feel about that?
Yeah.
How does was the exile really known in those conversations and in those meetings?
That's why I think some of my most frustrating conversations are with people who, once they get to the point where they're, maybe they have to go through detox or maybe they don't, right? But they get to the point where they're not drinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I ask them this question. I say, okay, have you gotten to the root yet? And the most frustrating conversations are the ones that say, well, there's nothing there. I just like the taste or I just like the feeling. And I'm always like, oh, okay, sure. Everyone likes the feeling. Everyone, sure, there's a taste to it. But if you don't get to the root, if you don't check in, if you don't talk to those parts who decided that I know that there are consequences for this action. I don't show up for work. I'm not present with my spouse. Like you see all these consequences. It can't just, I like the taste of steak. I don't eat steak until it makes me throw up, right?
Mm.
Like you would look at me and say, that's not right, right? But for some reason, when it comes to alcohol or drugs or whatnot, we can say, well, I just like the feeling, and that's it. And and so many just leave it there. And I think what IFS and what you're saying is, let's get to the deeper part of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's I is it all right if I share a little bit about my
Please.
story? Because everybody has their story, and that's part of the purpose of this podcast is for people to share stories, right? Well,
yeah.
I had during COVID, I noticed I was drinking wine every night for a while, and I noticed I even wanted to do it alone, and it was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right before you hit that sort of second shift of the day where you're with family, and at the witching hour for parents, like, oh gosh, what am I supposed to do with myself at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? And so I would just go and reach for that bottle of wine and pour a glass of wine and turn it into 2, and just getting really curious about why I would do that. And, personally, what helped me was to think about where is this going? And do I want to go down this path where this is what I do every day? And do I like the fact that I don't necessarily want everybody to know about this? And I started having feelings of guilt about that, and I didn't like that.
Yeah.
And, what helped, there was something else that helped me if I could share, which was my church was doing a 21 days of prayer and fasting, which they do every January. And I decided to try to give up the wine, but I decided to really pray about it because I was in this community that was praying together. And by the end of that 21 days, I didn't have the desire anymore. And it's sort of been gone since then. And so I'm so appreciative of my church because I think there's really power in a praying community to help us overcome unhealthy habits. But it was also through looking at like why, because if you're not drinking, then you have time to think about why do I want that drink?
Right.
It's like,
right.
I started thinking about like, why really did I care about that? And it was because of the stresses and pressures of parenting.
Yes.
And just like the depression that can come up sometimes when you don't get to do what you really want to do because you're needing to be present with a child, even though children are so lovable and my daughter brings so much joy into my life, she wants to do things that maybe don't interest me all the time. And then it creates that space in you to have those feelings you wish you didn't have, because you're not getting to do the things that you love all the time when you're a parent. So I was just noticing, wow. And I read a book, I can't even remember what book, but it said that parenting often surfaces our depressive parts. I was like, wow, that's really profound.
Wow.
Because we don't get to do I'm not even sure if addictive is the right word, but it's the habits that keep us from feeling our deeper emotions, whether it's socializing, with colleagues or reading books, like even something like reading soul care books. I love soul care and I'm always reading, I've got this book right here, Healing in the Bible. Like if I could just do anything all day long, like I would read soul care books, but even like, honestly, John, reading a soul care book could be a way of escaping my depression. Wow. I mean, mic drop, right?
Yes. We can turn anything,
yes,
right? Like John
anything.
Calvin said, our hearts are idol factories, right? And if you look at even if you look at the 7 deadly sins, right? They're all just perversions of something that are good, right?
Yeah.
Like gluttony is a perversion of just eating,
Yes.
Lust is a perversion of just the God-given, sex drive that we have. Like, they're all just perversions.
Right. Mm-hmm. And extreme versions. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So so taking the time to know myself and just saying like, wow. And I got to really understand my own depressive parts better and really got to accept. So I was like, I need a therapist. So I started working with a therapist and I realized, and then I had another huge discovery, which was that my depression was not an exile, but it was a manager part. My manager part was trying to manage my other emotions through causing me to be depressed. I was like, oh, that's really powerful for
Wow.
me. Because the reason why that was helpful for me was because I was able to work with the manager more than the exile. Like I was able to ask the manager to come up with another strategy.
Yes.
Like instead of using depression, like let's use like creativity and start to enter into play with my daughter more, and connect with her in new ways. And
okay.
Yeah.
That's mind blowing. That's incredible. And I think, you said something there, and I interviewed for my confessions book, I interviewed a mom who actually, her story is very similar to yours.
Okay.
And she said, I got to the point where I had to have my 2 glasses of wine every night. I wasn't getting drunk. I wasn't, throwing away oodles of money, but I was starting to hide it. I was starting to hide it from my husband. And, we'd go out to eat. And if the waiter didn't bring my second glass of wine soon enough, I'd get frustrated. She's like, I just was like, what now? And she would say, I realized I had a drinking problem. And that's interesting, right? Because I think there are some people who are like, what are you talking about? She had a drinking problem. And she's like, I did, because it was, I say in my book, anything that is misordered is disordered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what is so fascinating is that for the Christian, and this woman was a Christian, is the gospel and the scriptures offer an early warning detection system for things in our life that are becoming misordered, right?
Okay.
Like, so for you, it's like you realize, hey, I don't like this, right? And the gospel, and what James would say, is if the Holy Spirit is convicting you of something and you don't do it, it's sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe by the world's definition, Kim, just keep drinking. You're fine. What are you talking about? But because the world says it's really only about quantity and frequency. And sure, those are some aspects of if alcohol has occupied a wrong place in your life, but they're not the only ones. And especially for the Christian, they're not the only ones, right?
But and I have a friend, it's in my church small group, that loves to have her cocktail every afternoon, and she's absolutely fine with it. She's 100%. a devout Christian, and she, like, I walked into her house and she's got like all of her drinks on her little tray there, and in the bottles, and I can't do that because I don't, like I've said, I don't sleep well when I drink. I feel tired the next day. I also, I can't stop. If I start, I can't stop. And then I don't like the feeling of needing to have it every night.
Yes.
But I'll have a glass of wine at, a celebratory meal or something like that. And I'll enjoy it occasionally. And that's what works for me. Yeah. So, but I want to just recognize everybody has to know themselves. And it's really about understanding what does spiritual and physical and emotional and social health look like for you.
Yep.
But I mean, the Bible, as I'm sure you've explored in this podcast, Paul recommended a little bit of wine for a sick stomach.
For Timothy, right?
Yeah, to Timothy, and Jesus turned water into wine. So,
yes.
The Bible doesn't say, Ecclesiastes is all about like celebrating God's good gifts, and so we don't want to like shame people who. And I
100%.
have to say, I got a kick out of something in your book. I listened to your wonderful audiobook, Finding Rest, over the holidays, and this was before Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, but you talked about how you went off on a reading retreat and you packed and I knew you had written Confessions. And I think that's why this was funny to me, is that you're like, okay, I went on a writing retreat and I packed my change of clothes, some running shoes, or I forgot your running shoes. And I packed a little bit of bourbon. And I thought that was so funny.
Yeah. Yep.
And I just thought, okay, it's what felt healthy to you.
Yeah.
So
and there were times in my life that I could have it healthily, right? But what I've come to understand is that that's no longer the case, right?
Oh, okay. That's updating me, and that's part of what we do in with parts is we update them. So that's good to hear this update that you no longer would do that.
No, I can't. Okay. I've realized that now.
Okay.
The only drink I can say no to is the first one, right? That very quickly.
Okay.
It just becomes something that takes over, right? My wife, opposite. Like we go out to dinner, she can have one cocktail. And I'm kind of like, why would you have one cocktail when you can have three? You know what I mean? Like if you're not feeling something from that.
Yeah.
And that actually, maybe this brings me kind of, as we start to land the plane here.
Yeah.
A good question, which is, does that mean, and this is a very open-ended question, you can answer it however you want. You know, if I've come to that point where I realize I can't drink anymore, right? It takes over. And even if it were not to take over immediately, I know where this ends, right? I know where it goes. Is that just like the sin and brokenness that's in the world has so fractured some of those parts? Or is it, have I not done enough internal work with some of those exiles? Like, I'm just curious what you would say about that. Is it that I haven't done enough work, or is it that I just know that, hey, that sin has fractured some of that within me, and so I'm just not going to mess with it? I don't know.
That's a really interesting question. I get why you're asking that. So, yeah. So you're saying, like, if I were healed more, could I just have one glass?
Sure. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, where my mind goes is to the physical component that we have,
Yes.
Genetic
very true.
dispositions, and some people have certain, addictive tendencies to different substances. You have this, it's a biological genetic disposition toward addictiveness to alcohol, and it's good to know that about yourself.
And it does run in the family.
It runs in your family, right? And so you need to know that. I mean, I just heard a sermon by Max Lucado where he talked about how it ran in his family.
Yep.
And he struggled with alcohol addiction when he was younger, and not sure whether he still does, but he talked about the biological component. So is that brokenness? I guess so. I mean, in heaven, we probably won't have genetic dispositions toward alcoholism, right?
Right. Exactly.
So, but we all are in the same boat. So there's no shame around that.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have dispositions towards different tendencies. And I think just acknowledging we're not in heaven yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Kim, if people want to find out more about you, if they want to grab your book, if they want to invite you to speak, which I would highly encourage, where can they go to find more about what you're doing?
My website, KimberlyJuneMiller.com, and I have an Instagram account where I post twice a week.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook, but that's more just for personal pictures. If you want to see pictures of my daughter, go to Facebook. But otherwise... Otherwise, it's Instagram or my website. Yeah.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your insights and your wisdom. And I can say that you are as genuine in person as you come across on the podcast, as your writing is. And it has been a pleasure to, what I will say is, you don't often, I think I wrote this on Instagram, you don't often get to meet your heroes. And when you do, like, sometimes you can be really disappointed. And I don't mean to put that on you as pressure, but you are who you are. And I would highly encourage people to follow you, to grab boundaries for your soul. And as I step into the next era of what I'm doing ministry-wise, it is going to be one of the required readings because it is just so, so good. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, John. Thanks so much for having me. And I wanted to say blessings to all of your listeners, too. Thanks for listening to us today. Yeah.
Can you see what I mean about Kim just being one of the most genuine people? Even though you haven't, quote unquote, met her like I have in person. Well, maybe you have. It just comes across, right? She is soft. She is gentle. She is kind. She is thoughtful, right? If you watch this episode, you can see her. She thinks, right? And she doesn't speak before she thinks, right? And so I just am so grateful to her. And I can't repeat enough that part, not unironically, that discussion about how not all the parts of ourselves have been introduced to Jesus, I think is important. And I think it's something we should think about and wrestle with and contemplate and meditate on. And I would hope that you would take this, that one of the things that you take from this episode is, how do you introduce Jesus to all the parts of yourselves? What are those parts that you have been hiding from him? You have walled off because you don't want to face him. That was my thing, right? When I talk about why this happened in my life, how I became the Christian alcoholic, there were parts of myself that I had walled off. I didn't want to go there. There were exiles that I didn't want to talk with, that I didn't want to meet, that I didn't want to open up the can of worms that was there. And, you know, I've given this example before, but it's like, if you come over to my house, I'll clean up the living room, I'll clean up the kitchen, I'll clean up the downstairs. But, you know, the kids' room, I will close that door, right? And that doesn't take care of the mess that's inside. That doesn't take care of the rotting pizza that's inside, the hot pocket that's been there for a couple weeks, right? And eventually that smell and that stench and the rats and the everything will just end up pouring out of that room into the clean parts. And that's what happened with me, right? Like, I had those places that I'd shut the door and just let that stuff in there. I didn't want to face it. And then it wasn't long. Well, I should say it was long, right? And over a slow process, right? That those things, that rottenness just kind of spilled over into the rest of the house. And so I want to encourage you to open up those rooms, open up those parts to Jesus, and let him in there. He's a great cleaner. He is a great cleaner, and he's going to come for it all, right? So hopefully that was as encouraging to you as it was to me. I'm like pumped. I am like stoked after that episode. Like, oh, Kim is so great. So pick up her book, Boundaries for Your Soul, right here. I'm holding it up. It is so good. And I like just spend time with it. Marinate in the wisdom that is in there. Love you all. Thank you to our partner, Life Audio, lifeaudio.com. You can go and check out some other great podcasts there. Sean McDowell, Christy Osborne, Kirby Kelly, Carol McCracken has a couple on there. She's been a guest on this podcast as well. So love our friends over at Life Audio. They have been great to me and to you, really, because without them, you wouldn't be listening to this. So love you all. We'll see you here next week.